Today, we have bass baritone Michael Riley with us. Michael, it's always a pleasure. Were your family musical? Did you have any musical people in your family as you were growing up?
Yes, none professional.
Okay.
My grandfather, for example, was a lead and zinc miner.
Okay.
Who was born and raised in Kentucky. And just reaching over here, this is his banjo, his 5-string.
Wow.
And I inherited that. And when I was doing young people's concerts as an affiliate artist, I would often start with the banjo and do some Pete Seeger type songs and things as kind of a grabber.
Wow,
so,
good.
You know, it was fun to do that. And I occasionally still torture my old 5-string, but you know, the 4 chords that I know.
Right. So where did you grow up?
Columbus, Kansas.
Columbus, Kansas. Okay.
Columbus, Kansas. Yes, the motto of the Chamber of Commerce is "Help America Discover Columbus."
That's cute. I like that.
It is. It's true. It's true, and it hasn't
Right.
so far. About 3,285 people when I was growing up there.
Wow.
Was the county seat of Cherokee County, the southeasternmost county in Kansas, right across the line from Joplin, Missouri,
Mm-hmm.
and north of Miami, Oklahoma.
Wow.
Not Miami, but
Yeah,
Miami.
my mama. Right. Oh, wow. Okay.
Near the Grand Lake of the Cherokees.
Mm.
So it was an interesting place. All my people were from there. My father's and his family were all farmers, and up until the time he went off to World War II and
Wow.
came home and worked in a chemical plant for most of my growing up. He had a beautiful bass voice. He could play the guitar. My mother, like a lot of members of her family, was a teacher in an 8th grade one-room school. So she could play the piano a little bit, as could her mother. And people were always musical. My great-grandfather from Kentucky was a fiddle player.
Wow.
So, everybody could do something in music.
Mm-hmm.
I only had one brother.
Okay.
And he was a fantastic pianist.
Wow.
And clarinetist. And so, the two of us were some of the more musical kids in my hometown. So we were known as the Riley Boys, and they're the ones who do music.
When did you actually start formal lessons?
I actually took piano lessons from the time I was 4. I could actually read notes before I could read other types of alphabetic words.
I believe it. I believe it.
And it's been a huge help because I never got to be a great pianist, but it gave me a good background.
Absolutely.
And so that led to my being a pretty decent trumpet player. Mm-hmm. And later on, I was trained at the University of Kansas as a music teacher, although I acted more like a voice major because I was in all the productions and opera work.
So you basically, you started singing in college or prior to college?
No, I started singing. I was singing in Sunday school, and I always was in the little musical programs at school. Mm-hmm. By the time I got to high school, I began to take voice lessons from a gentleman named Clyde O. Davidson, who had been my grandmother's music teacher.
Wow.
And had been in the community off and on all those years. Okay. And the piano teacher, a lady named Lorene Grant Piper, had been there for generations and was a marvelous teacher and also taught us music theory in addition to piano.
Very important.
And so it was a time when there was a great deal of support in the public schools for music. We had an outstanding choral department. We did shows every year. We had a pretty decent marching band. I eventually was one of the drum majors. So it was a fairly good-sized rural high school, and we had a very active music department. I actually was fortunate because I was able to teach public school music until it was time for me to get out and start singing professionally.
Wow. What was that? How old were you when you actually had your first professional job?
I had some jobs already when I was in college. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I was around 19 or 20. I went to the Dallas Summer Musicals.
Wow, okay.
I was a chorister there. Mm-hmm. And then the following 2 summers after college, I was an apprentice artist at the Santa Fe Opera Company.
Wow.
That was pivotal.
Yes, I would say
tremendously pivotal because we covered major roles, we performed minor roles, we were the chorus, and we had all kinds of classes in drama, in movement, and makeup, and on a wide range of things, and we were rubbing shoulders with the people who were some of the professional singers of that day, like Donald Graham.
Yes.
people of that sort, who were there as established artists. So I could see what you had to know.
Right, exactly.
And how they conducted themselves, and things of that sort. And so, I mean, it's a little bit like your master class. Very fortunate to be a part of, and I thank you for including me.
Absolutely, thank you.
But no, I've learned a lot, as well as hopefully passing on a couple of things that I picked
Absolutely.
up. It was really very, very helpful to be able to be in the company of these people,
sure,
to stage with them, to perform with them, and so then I knew what it was, how much more it was I had to learn before I would be ready to do what they were doing.
So, what was your first major role? What was it?
My first role in college in production of Madame Butterfly was the Bonze.
Okay, really? Okay.
Yes. And then the next year I was Bartolo in The Marriage of Figaro.
Wow.
And then my senior year, I was in the centennial production of Carrie Nation. It was a centennial of the University of Kansas.
Okay.
And Douglas Moore came, and he had composed an opera for us. And he came and he spent the semester. And so I got to know him in the latter years of his life. And so we performed these major roles, and and then we had a professional cast, including John Reardon, Beverly Wolf, Patricia Brooks was one of the other performers, city opera types.
Yeah. Yep.
And they were doing the roles in the premiere, but then there was a student cast, of which I was one of the principals in the student cast. So we actually worked very, very closely with Douglas Moore for this whole semester, getting this ready. Ready for its premiere.
If you had to mention a name now, who would you say gave you the most polishing of your vocal ability? It could be a coach, it could be a teacher, somebody who is very instrumental in giving you your art. Who would you say that person would be?
It'd be hard to pin it down to one person. I think the person who has had the most abiding influence on my singing was Armin Boyajian.
Oh, wow. I work with Armin myself.
Yes. I wasn't aware of that.
Yes.
But, my friend Samuel Ramey, who is also a Kansan, who's from Colby, Kansas, had been working with him, and he got phenomenal results. So I studied with him also for a number of years. Wow. But there were some other people who were extremely helpful. I had coaches in New York and in other parts of the country as well. But I think it's really Armin who gave me the type of technique that allows me to still be singing.
Right.
And I'm getting into my upper 70s. And I'm still able to crank it out.
Which I've heard. What was it, 2 years ago? Battle of the Basses.
The Battle of the Basses with my buddy John Cheek.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful performance.
That was where you and I reconnected.
Yes, but we sang something together.
The Opera Company of Philadelphia, where you and I got to know each other initially.
Yes. Actually, it's the drugs in the 80s. I don't remember.
and your wife Joan, I think,
was
also singing with them at that time. Yes. So that's how we became aware of each other in the first place.
Yeah.
Because I lived near Philadelphia for about 30 some years.
Right.
And my wife was the person who moved us there because for a number of years she was the manager of the Philadelphia Orchestra.
If you had, I'm asking this question as a standard, you had one performance in your entire career. When you were walking off to the wings, you were 4 foot walking off 4 foot off the ground because it went so spectacularly. There was nothing more perfect that could ever happen. What would that performance be for you?
Wow, what a question. I think one of the things I considered I was fairly early in my singing. There was a summer opera that summer opera company north of Baltimore that I sang with for a number of years called the Hartford Opera Theater. No T, Hartford. Not
okay.
Hartford Opera Theater. And Saul Lilienstein had a nice little company there, and we performed initially with two pianos.
Wow.
And it was semi in the round and one thing or another. But he had asked me to do the title role in Wozzeck.
Wow.
And that was a huge challenge. You know, not only doing Sprechstimme for the first time, but just learning that role.
It's amazing, yeah.
I remember the dress rehearsal. There was a very elaborate set, and it was a revolving set, and it was operated by a rope, which was very taut, quite incredible tension, so that it could revolve, and it kept being problematic, and they kept having huge problems with it. But they finally got it, and I think we had a rehearsal until like 2 a.m. or something like that. So nobody could relax and count on the fact that it was going to be perfect, for our opening. But it went spectacularly well, and I think that was one of my first, what I would consider, big achievements as a singing actor.
Wow.
That had a huge influence on me, I think.
That would be a very, very, very difficult. It's a very difficult part, and that's quite an accomplishment.
Thinking back, though, I was in my sophomore year in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I was cast as the king in The King and I.
Really?
Shaved my head.
With that head of hair, it's a shame.
Yeah.
Me, it doesn't matter. Look.
No, I know. Well, at that time, we would have butch cuts anyway, so It was only about a quarter-inch shorter than usual. But nonetheless, we didn't expect to get cast, as a 15-year-old. But there I was doing The King and I, and we got a standing ovation.
And that's something. Wow.
Every performance. Wow. And I think that kind of ruined me.
Yep. I got bit.
Spoiled for life, Mm-hmm. Couldn't understand why I didn't always get a standing ovation.
Right. What to pass on to these young singers that we see in masterclass, that pinnacle age between a master's and professional. You personally, what did you have to work on vocally to get to that next step? Or was it musically? Or was it a combination of both? What did you have to do personally?
I had to relearn and unlearn a number of things. I mean, I know that some of the best advice I ever got from a singer was, it was actually John Reardon, and I had gotten to know him because of the Carrie Nation thing I was telling you about. And he heard me singing at Santa Fe when I was an apprentice there, and I'd had a coaching, and he was there. He heard it, so I asked him his opinion and or if he had any suggestions, and he said, Mike, I would say that you sound like a much older singer than you are, but not in the most complimentary sense.
Wow.
I was, like a lot of young singers, trying to sound a lot older than I was.
Sure.
And so I had, that really was an ouchie, but I needed to hear that.
Sure.
So I kept working vocally, and that's advice that I've given to a lot of young singers. Sound your age.
Exactly. Great.
Don't sound any younger. Don't sound any older. But the people our age, we want to sound like we did when we were 30.
Exactly.
But at least you can strive to maintain that kind of chiaroscuro, that kind of dark light sound that has a good core to it, that doesn't have a wobble that you can drive a truck through.
Mm-hmm. I get it. In closing, I have to say one thing, Michael, that our friendship is great. of usual. We've known each other a long time. I have to say, your dedication to music is an inspiration. I greatly, greatly appreciate your work with Masterclass. I mean, I think that your comments are spot on. I think that you're an inspiration to these younger singers and someone that they can look up and ask about because you've been there. Admire your singing, of course. That's just a given. What would you say to a young singer now? What would you tell them as an inspirational phrase to say in a few words? What would you do to maintain the career that they're going to achieve?
I would say that one should pay attention to the essentials of healthy vocalism, and to be as well prepared as one possibly can. You can't know too much about a role. You need to know, for example, the whole opera, even if you're doing a supporting role. You need to know what everyone else is doing, what happened before, what happens after, what the whole arc of the opera is, and you need to know what you're saying. Otherwise, you may make beautiful sounds, but if they're nonsense syllables, an audience senses that.
Yes.
So this is already more than a few words, but I mean, I think some of those things are essential. You have to be true to yourself. I mean, I know some people used to say, well, this is my Mozart voice or this is my Handel voice. No, we have one voice. We have to be true to that and try to maintain those essentials. And then if you're lucky enough to have good health, then, you can still be singing. I am fortunate that this summer I will be doing my 10th season up at Bard Summerscape in 11 years. We got canceled last year because of COVID, but we're going to be doing live performances again this summer. Great. And this is how I have extended my career. So I'm a freelance singer in New York City. And one of the things that this got me into was this wonderful ensemble situation at Bard Summerscape. So excellent. I've had another decade. I've extended my singing by another decade because I was a decent musician with a decent enough voice that I'm still working. And and next August I'll be 77.
God bless.
So I'm going to try to outlast Domingo.
There you go. Well, ladies and gentlemen, here you've heard it from the great Michael Riley, a dear friend, a great artist, and a wonderful human being. Michael, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for your dedication to music and Masterclass. I can't thank you enough. I love you.
See you again soon, I hope. All right.
I hope so. Take care, Michael. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello and welcome, Hugh Kronrot, conductor, coach, and singer, as a matter of fact. Thank you for being a panelist on Masterclass, and we are very honored to have you as a panelist. And I have a few questions I'd like to ask you for our audience, for our young singers. And how did you get started in music? I mean, were you educated? Did you have music in the house?
Actually, the music we had in our house was an AM radio. This is the early 1950s, and AM radio in those days played the top 40 or the top 50 over and over again. So by the time I was 3, 4, 5 years old, I knew these tunes. And my grandparents bought for me a small xylophone, one of these toy xylophones with 1 octave of colored bars.
I remember them.
I picked out a few tunes on it, at which point my parents noticed that I had a musical ear. And they found me a teacher of xylophone who was not himself a xylophonist, but he was willing to do it. He was actually a psychologist.
Oh, really? Okay.
Which was probably the wisest choice anyway for me. So that's how I began. I began as a percussionist.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah, I played the percussion instruments from the time I was 5. And I worked professionally as a percussionist when I became, an advanced teen and an adult. I added the piano when I was 10. When I entered high school, I was put into the orchestra. There was a string class. I played the cello a bit, playing percussion primarily in the school orchestra, and then adding choral music. So, I kind of dabbled in all of these things.
When you graduated high school, did you have an outlook? Did you know that this is what you wanted to do? And, going forward, did you want to have a musical career?
I was torn at the time. I had a very deep interest in the sciences and math, along with music from an early age. And I was not sure what my major would be. When I received my letters of admission to colleges, I chose to go to Brandeis University. Now, I understand I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
Right.
So I was going to move to Boston and enroll at a university which had strengths in both the sciences and in music. I lasted a year there, at which point I decided that I would go into music, and what I really needed was a more focused program than a liberal arts college could give me. And so I applied to the Juilliard School, being a New Yorker. I was 17 years old at the time.
Wow.
And the Juilliard School held auditions for conductors, which was the subject I proposed to study, in September. Now, understand, I was less than 3 months before my 18th birthday. And this was in 1967 at the height of the Vietnam War.
Right.
So a lot was riding on the success of the audition. Unfortunately, I was very young for that program, and they did not accept me. And my future was one of two things. I could either see if another school would take an application at that point, or I would be drafted and sent to Vietnam.
Wow.
Fortunately, the colleges that form part of what we call the City University today were still accepting applications. And one of those was Brooklyn College, which incidentally is across the street from my high school. And so I applied there. And of course, I was accepted. It turned out, in retrospect, to be a very good choice. And the reason was that I met there a faculty member, a conductor, by the name of Károly Körpe. He was Hungarian originally and had come to the United States in the early 1950s. He was a child, well, a young teen during the war. He decided to study music in Italy, went to Rome, to the Academy of St. Cecilia, which is the premier musical, or was the premier musical academy in that country at the time. He had 2 majors. One was conducting, obviously. The other was organ. And he got diplomas in both of these areas from the conservatory. Came to the United States and found that he could not get tenure at a college because his Italian degree was not accredited in a university system. Then was denied tenure. Decided to do what he could to rectify that. And what he did is he enrolled at Juilliard in a master's program in conducting, which of course he aced because the training he received in Italy was fantastic. And with a master's degree, he was able to get a job with the City University system and eventually to obtain tenure. He became a full professor over many, many years. Wow. The point about the knowing him is that with his European background, he not only was an orchestral conductor, but he was an opera conductor. And he invited me to to come to the opera theater, which was an extracurricular activity. I showed up one afternoon, and he knew that I was a pianist. And he said, have you ever worked with singers before? I said, only in choral settings. He said, well, here's the score of the Magic Flute. Go in the room next to our rehearsal room, and the three ladies are practicing the opening scene, and see if you can teach it to them. Over the 4 years that I spent at Brooklyn College, 2 years as an undergrad, 2 years as a grad student, he basically taught me everything I would need to know as a collaborator, as a conductor, as a coach in the field of opera.
Obviously, you stood in opera. I mean, you stood, you know, especially as a conductor and a coach. What was your initial draw to that field? I mean, because you could have easily been an orchestral conductor. You could have been choral conductor. What in opera drew you into it?
Well, the very first program that we presented, that the Opera Theater presented during the time I was involved with it, was a scene program. And the scenes were from Falstaff, the Rosenkavalier. The third opera escapes me for the moment. But I did all kinds of things. I mean, I sang the role of Pistol in the Falstaff scene.
Right.
And I also pulled the curtain. Scene.
Too good.
So I got involved in that. The Rosenkavalier was quite interesting. What we did was a compilation of the 3 scenes that involve only the ladies.
Right. Okay.
It began with the Octavian Marschallin duet of Act 1. Right. It had the presentation of the Rose from Act 2. And then finally, obviously, the very famous trio. And of course, the music is glorious.
Absolutely, yeah, sure.
You know, it was an incredible experience for a 17-year-old with this music, and to experience opera at this level of intensity. And this was just a scene program.
Sure. Your parents, your sister, were they musical? Was there anybody else that was musical in the family?
Actually, no. My parents had a background in the visual arts.
Okay.
My father had studied architecture. My mother was a fine artist. My sister is today a fine artist. In fact, that's whom I'm visiting right now.
Right. Your resume is so vast and extensive. What would you say from when you left college to the time that you made your first professional debut in whatever it was? What was that experience like, from moving from the college, which sounds like it was quite intense, more professional than most opera companies today? Make that transition from college to professional?
Well, it happened very quickly. Because my conducting teacher had a background in the profession. He was not only an academic. He advised me to go to Europe. He said to me, and you have to understand, this is the 1960s. There were not that many opportunities for young conductors and coaches in the United States. There weren't that many opera companies, and the number of productions they did. Small. Yeah. Whereas in Europe, following the war, the countries of Western Europe, at least, and this was, you know, during an era when the Iron Curtain existed and so on, supported the arts very, very extensively. I took it upon myself to investigate what was available. I got a copy of Musical America, which in those days had a very extensive directory of producing organizations all over the world, but primarily for me in Europe. And I sent letters of application to hundreds of them, essentially. There were very many of them. I had to learn to write these letters in different languages, to translate my resume and so on. I did that. My first professional job, which occurred actually only about 6 months after I graduated, was in the United States. It was with Skylight Opera in Milwaukee.
Oh my God, yeah.
Second company in Milwaukee. There is a bigger one known as Florentine. I was engaged by Skylight. Skylight was a very small theater, about 200 some odd seats. And generally, there was no orchestra involved in the productions, or just a few instruments. There was not really a pit. There was a kind of a depression, I can call it, under the stage, a small platform big enough for a small grand piano and perhaps a couple of instrumentalists. And the opera we produced that I began with was The Marriage of Figaro.
Wow.
It was done in English translation, of course, in the Schirmer score. And it was my first opportunity to be completely responsible for the music of an entire opera. Within some months after that, I went to Europe because I started to get answers to my letters.
Mm-hmm.
And the first two engagements I got there, the first was at the Spoleto Festival.
Wow.
This is Spoleto in Italy, South Carolina. This predates that. This was, in fact, the 10th edition, the 10th year that Giancarlo and his staff produced operas in the city of Spoleto. That was in the summer. And from there, I began a full-time contract at the Nuremberg Opera.
And how old were you say you were at that time?
Well, I was 20. I mean, understand that they weren't offering to put me in the pit as conductor immediately. One of the givens in the opera world is that people are not hatched from the head of Zeus. Generally, we learn that as coaches. We learn that as assistant conductors. We learn that as prompters. We learn that as ballet pianists. We do all of these things, choral masters, and so on. These are all jobs that I did at one time or another. And it was only gradually that I was allowed or invited into the orchestra pit. In Germany, the way young conductors typically begin is that they are coaches, they're accompanists, and they work with the principal conductors on the productions. They follow them into the production after a production is already running.
Okay. And who were some of the conductors that you worked with there?
Let's see. This is years ago. I may not remember all of them. Okay. Director in Nuremberg was a man named Hans Gierster. Hans Gierster had been an assistant to Clemens Krauss in Munich, in the years after the war. He was in his, I guess, his 50s by the time, I came around in 1972 or thereabouts. And so he was the principal conductor in that house. There were one or two other conductors who were older than him, who had been conductors during the war. I got to work with some of the singers and conductors and directors who had been there that long. Of course, I was on the young side. I worked with other conductors of repute in Germany and more recently in Italy. I was in Germany a total of about four or 5 years. Came back to the United States because I had married an American at that time. Eventually returned to Italy. And this time I had a longer engagement at the Arena di Verona. Wow. The Arena di Verona, for those of you who are not sure exactly what it is what the Roman Colosseum would be if it were working, if there weren't a ruin. This is what it would be. The Arena di Verona has been restored. It has been rebuilt. It has been preserved over the centuries. And so it is a complete stone oval, approximately 4 blocks long, seating about 25,000 people. I cannot begin to describe what it is like to do Italian opera for Italians in a setting like that.
Now you're in today's society. What do you feel that singers need to get themselves first ready to be between that college and that professional level?
There's so much. I was fortunate in that having been oriented by my conducting teacher, amongst other faculty members, the faculty of my college was basically all folks who had come from Europe, mostly as a result of the war. And so there was a great deal of understanding of the environment that I was going to end up going into. I needed languages. I had to have conversational skill in the languages of the countries I proposed to work in. I had to have basic skill. I mean, I was a pianist, I was a conductor, and all of these things. I had to have at least a smattering of repertoire so that I would not be having to learn everything from scratch. Now, speaking to a young singer, it is a big thing to say, you should learn a role. It takes months to learn a role. There's no way to build them into one's body, one's voice, one's mind, one's thinking, one's movement, one's character quickly. It's never too early to start, however. We're all asked repeatedly for our 5 arias. We're asked for our showpieces. That doesn't begin to scratch the surface of what roles are, or what the process of preparing in the studio with the teacher, with the coach, with the language specialist, and then rehearsing the roles is going to be like.
Right.
Basically, we're in a field where we learn on our feet, with all due respect, and I do have a lot of respect for those who teach in colleges, those who teach privately, even those who teach younger musicians, and give them the orientation, the energy, the pats on the back, the you can do it, to encourage them into the field. You're going to learn more in the first few years that you actually work, whatever capacity you work in. If you're a singer, you may not be singing principal roles. You may be singing in a chorus. You may be singing comprimario roles. You may be singing secondary roles that are not walk-ons, but not yet, the roles that would make you famous. All of these things will gradually contribute to your skill, because the rehearsal process, you never have enough time, right? I'm not the first person to say that. Lenny Bernstein said something similar about orchestral music, amongst other things. There's never enough time, and ultimately we are largely reliant on ourselves.
For when you're searching for that one role.
Well, it's a mix of all of those things, and some things that are even difficult to articulate in words what they are. The casting process for an opera, and I have been a manager of an opera company, so I have seen it, in that way as well. I'm speaking not only as a musician, as a conductor, is very complex. A singer whom you're seriously considering for a role obviously has to be able to sing the role with mastery, has to look reasonably, appropriate for the role. In other words, it's generally not possible for a young singer to sing an older role, a much older role. I mean, with all the gray makeup you want, it's not convincing sometimes. But as far as, the sort of special, as John put it, back of the neck, hair going up on your neck experience, sometimes you have it in an audition. It doesn't happen, with every singer. Obviously, it's a very strong persuader if it does happen.
Where you walked off the stage and you were 4 foot high off the ground, and you just floated off the stage because the performance went impeccably well and you felt like you did absolutely a tremendous job. What was that one performance for you?
Well, I guess there were 2. The first one was a production of Rigoletto that I conducted at the Orlando Opera. I was slotted into this production at the last minute.
Oh.
The general manager of the company, previous general manager, a man named Richard Sowers, had left the company at the end of the spring season, and they were without a general manager. And they hired Richard Owens. Richard Owens was, some of you may know, the founder of AIMS, the American Institute of Musical Studies in Austria. He went on to found another similar program in Bavaria, Germany, in his later years. But he had this sort of interlude of 6 years as the general manager of this opera company. And I had already conducted for him in Austria. So he invited me on short notice to step into this production. The Rigoletto was Fred Birchinall.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Who at the same time was singing Macbeth at the Met, and was at the height of his career. He was in his upper 30s, which is a great age to sing a role like that. And he had, ease. He had done it before. He was a joy to work with. The great crowd pleaser of that opera, of course, is the aria Cortigiani, which comes in the earlier part, let's say, of the second or third act, depending on how you count the act.
Right.
And Cortigiani is it's a showpiece for the singer, and it's also a showpiece for the conductor. The aria has three parts to it. The first part is very stormy, beginning with all of the orchestras, the strings especially, showing the upset, the level of passion of Rigoletto. In the middle of the aria, and what has happened, of course, I'm sure I don't need to tell you the story of the aria. The aria begins at that place of extreme passion, extreme anger. Gradually, it steps its way downward. And the third section of the aria is a kind of a plea. Rigoletto realizes by that time that he doesn't have the power to do anything about the situation, and he has begged the courtiers to intercede on his behalf to help him. And they have turned their back on him for the reason that he was unpopular with them, having made fun of them and participated in some of the Duke's escapades anyway. But the final section of the aria is a remarkable composition for a trio of voices, for a solo cello, a solo English horn, and the baritone. Very difficult to plan how it's going to be before, with as much rehearsing as you do. The conductor, don't know exactly how long the breath of the baritone is going to be. By that time, he's going to be tired. And it's also the moment of his greatest vulnerability as a character. And so he's going to be acting up a storm. And the way it has to be conducted is basically you have to conduct almost every note. The music is written in 12/8, which is 4 beats of 3 notes to a bar, and you have to conduct every one of them. And it was a transporting experience to feel that my arm was so connected with his song, with his passion, with his moment, that there was no chance that anything could go wrong.
Wow.
This passage had scared the daylights out of me before we did it in the performance. And then I discovered that in the performance, it was just like being in some greater power took control of everything. So that was, one of my, the moments that I remember most fondly. The second one was actually at a college. I was for a time the music director of the opera theater at Temple University in Philadelphia. And, foolishly or otherwise, we chose to produce the Macropolis case. It was a very big stretch for the school to do that. Fortunately, we had, a remarkable bunch of singers, mostly grad students, because the vocalism was quite demanding. The young kids, it was for the older singers, and we could cast it, and we did. It was an interesting production, but what I'm going to speak about is the music rather than the production itself. I'm not going to go through the story of the opera, except to say that it concerns the question of what do we live for? What is worth living for? And the principal character, whose name is Macropoulos, is a woman who was given a potion hundreds of years ago, which extended her life indefinitely. She couldn't die. And what has happened to her is that, having never aged during that time, every person with whom she has been in love has died.
Right.
As we all do. And she's had to kind of rethink the whole question of what good is it to live that long? If the people that matter to you can't be with you. We get to the final scene of the opera, and basically there's a monologue in which she presents that question. And finally, she decides that she will not take the potion again. She will, allow her life to end, etc. musically, what we have is a 15-minute monologue for soprano and the, lush romantic orchestra of 70 or so players. When I arrive to the beginning of that moment in the scene, I don't know what's about to happen because, again, it's one singer. She has been singing all night. I'm asking of her the greatest, moment of emotion from the entire opera, even if she's physically not tired at that point, which I'm sure she was. And again, I have to take great risks with the music. And the risk I chose to take here was rather the opposite of the one in Rigoletto. The music is written in 6/4 time. And obviously it can be conducted in 6, but I chose to conduct it in a very slow 2.
Wow.
Which is a leap of faith. This is something that Bernstein did, with some frequency in similar moments in Mahler and, music of other composers. And I chose to take that risk. And once again, the music vindicated everything and it worked out.
In closing, you've had a remarkable career. I mean, a vast career. So many different things, working in different countries, working in different languages, working with different singers. I'm sure hundreds and hundreds. What advice would you give to a young singer right now in the time that we're in right now? What would you expect from them?
Well, to begin with, as I said earlier, the match of the singer with the part is important.
Okay.
It's understood that a singer who comes through the door and, is a younger singer, will be better matched to certain roles than to other roles. Obviously, if you're casting La Bohème, you can cast a young singer in the role of Mimi and possibly in the role of Musetto, although that's quite demanding vocally. Going to work less well in most of Verdi. It goes without saying that I expect a singer who is, offering themselves to perform a role, that they know the role, that their language is in order, that they're good musicians, all of these things. These are basics. I also, would like to have the feeling that the singer is comfortable in their skin, in that role. It makes me uneasy if a singer, looks awkward in some way. One of the comments that I made to a young singer in a college was one time, she was singing Mimi's opening aria. And Mimi, as we know, is a poor seamstress and, a young woman of no means. And this singer was wearing a very ostentatious piece of jewelry. And although she sang beautifully, and I remarked upon this at the audition. I think these were, beginning of semester auditions in college.
Okay.
And I said, I wonder, if you had planned to sing this role, whether you should rethink something like this.
How do you deal with a situation where you feel that this is not an appropriate interpretation, and you're the conductor? How do you, because some singers, of course, have egos, and some conductors, but how do you deal with a situation when somebody comes in with this precast idea that really isn't correct? And how do you change their thought process about that? How would you do that?
Well, correct is overstating anyone's case, including mine as the conductor of a production.
But in your opinion,
if where I have had maybe the most important task of any conductor is tempo. Mozart said that, and it hasn't changed in 230 years. I did have a singer one time who shall be nameless, who was my Violetta in La Traviata, and she insisted on singing the final act aria incredibly slowly. She had done it, in other productions that way. And as a matter of fact, we had a stage director for that show who had worked with her. And so they were kind of, in tune with each other. And I was the odd man out. I had to do the best I could. to accommodate her. There's no point in disagreeing publicly with a colleague.
I agree.
It doesn't benefit the production, and it doesn't help the audience. I did what I could to accommodate her. You know, the judgment of the critic was favorable. It may not have been what I wanted, but in looking at it, you know, all in all, it was probably the best solution. You have to understand that in many production situations, you don't have the opportunity to rehearse musically, you know, on a location. And at best, you will have one or two musical run-throughs, and then you're in staging. You, the conductor, are with the orchestra. So you basically have to know who you're casting or know who has been cast in your show before you get there, have a sense of what to expect. And then where you have to be adaptable, you're adaptable.
You have a gift that very few conductors do. There is no old school. There's only one school, and the school that we belong to, and that's what makes Masterclass and its panelists so successful and so ideologic, is because everyone, believe it or not, says the same thing in a different way. We have a similar goal. One of the skills that our singers need today is that they need to know that you have to know the music, you have to know the history, and you have to be able to accept someone else's opinion, whether you agree with it or not. But a lot of people don't know what it is to look into the score a little deeper than the notation, the editor's notation that's on the page. And I think that you having encyclopedic knowledge, actually, of what's asked in the score. In today's opera society, that we're cast out as old timers, things that are of the past, the new style of opera, which I don't agree with most of the time at all, because I think people are miscast. I think people have turned music where it no longer becomes the composer's ideas. It's a breath of fresh air to hear somebody who can go back and say that I worked with this person. I've worked in Austria. I worked in Verona. I've worked in America. That's quite impressive, because most people who are working today have been in one position. Hugh, I am honored to call you a friend, a colleague, and a coach and conductor. And we're very happy to have you with Masterclass. We're truly honored. And I can't say enough about you. Appreciate you more than you know. So I'd like to thank you again for all you do for Masterclass. I'd like to thank you again for being a part of our family. And I can't wait till we can sit down and have dinner again, because we really need it. You mean the world to me.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.